Democrats debating policy as Donald Trump reveals himself at a rambling rally.
Free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels and embrace renewable wind.
Darling, the wind isn't blowing. The goddamn windmill stopped.
Cut all carbon emissions from new buildings. By 2035, all carbon emissions from the manufacture of electricity.
The bulb that we're being forced to use, number one, to me, most importantly, the light's no good. I always look orange.
Should more Americans follow your diet?
First of all, I want to say no. Actually, I want to translate that into Spanish. No.
No more cows, no more planes. I guess no more people. I think it was Buttigieg. Nobody can pronounce this guy's name. Joni Ernst and John Thune and Mike Pounds.
We have a white supremacist in the White House, and he poses a mortal threat to people of color all across this country.
I hit Pocahontas way too early.
We're going to have a Democratic president, a Democratic House, and a Democratic Senate. There will be life after Donald Trump.
There will be life after Donald Trump. You know, it really is easy sometimes, even for those of us who follow this on the reg, to forget how starkly the two parties are diverging right now. These big political nights do many things, but one of them is just bring that into focus. Now, how are Americans taking it in? How are you taking it in? It may depend in part, especially nowadays, on the filter. I want you to see how Donald Trump's favorite network was playing it.
The Democrat Party wants to take away pretty much everything from the American people.
Univision's Jorge Ramos is an unabashed crusader for illegal immigration. He made no attempt to hide it.
It's basically Medicare for all inside a Trojan horse.
It was like there was a cue card. You have to genuflect before Obama before pushing more liberal ideas.
Katie, you're a winner.
I would say that President Trump and the economy that he has built is the winner.
A bold take there, a winner of the debate who wasn't in the debate. Now, the other key moments, of course, that are continuing to drive where this race heads with no apparent front runner yet. Joe Biden making that comment about record players, which was confusing at least. Andrew Yang on doctors. Kamala Harris's Wizard of Oz joke. And then, of course, Julian Castro, who really was calling out his view of Joe Biden's fitness for office. Those are people who served in Obama's administration together. It's also interesting what didn't make last night's debate. We heard very little about the impeachment fight that is consuming Washington Democrats. That's from the moderators or the candidates. And also we noted and we checked virtually no discussion of abortion and choice. I want to bring in our panel tonight, Basil Smikle, former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party, knows his way around many of these races and these candidates. Matt Welch on the right, an editor-at-large for Reason Magazine, and Margaret Carlson from the Daily Beast. Margaret, what did you see last night?
Well, when you did that mashup at the beginning, Ari, I saw for the first time Trump was the 11th person on the stage, a stage of his own creation, because he was counter-programming all along the way. What the people on the actual stage didn't know was that they're running against Trump. And when they're running against Trump, they're all winning. When they're running against each other, they're not. And they're pushing each other to the left, where it makes it much harder for them to win.
Matt, what do you think about coming at that as a libertarian? And some of what I'm sure you heard didn't sound like the Obama or Bill Clinton Democratic Party, where you're coming out of, or at least where you cut your teeth. Sure. It's a Democratic Party that is now competing on major national government role in your life.
It's interesting. You talked about how there's a big divergence between the Trump vision of the world and Democratic vision. There's a big divergence between the 2013 Democratic Party and the 2019 Democratic Party. Like, now we're all legalizing weed. Great, as far as I'm concerned. Everyone wants to get out of Afghanistan. That wasn't a consensus view. Fracking should be banned across the board. It wasn't really exactly where things should go. Criminal justice, we should, end the drug war and free 17,000 prisoners or more. A lot of that is pretty different, and we're not going to enforce immigration in the same way that Barack Obama did. And we saw Joe Biden get kind of tripped up on that question. Lied, actually, is what he did when he responded to, we didn't put people in cages, we didn't separate families. They did do some of those things. So you see this divergence in the party. Some of it is good from a civil libertarian point of view, but a lot of it, to me, the moment that struck with me is when Kamala Harris laughed at Joe Biden when Joe Biden dared to say, you can't just do everything. There is a Constitution. It has to be constitutional. Joe Biden was about the only person on stage to introduce any kind of notion of restraint about what the federal government can do. That is new and kind of different from 6 years ago.
Well, yeah, I agree that's how it sounded. I would add that restraint isn't going to win the election because the way the Democratic base is situated now, sort of referring to your point earlier, is largely influenced by how Bernie Sanders ran in 2016, quite frankly. So you've heard all of the other candidates, Biden's probably the exception, but you've heard other candidates adopt in some way, shape, or form his talking points in 2016.
I think that's true ideologically, but did you notice that Sanders and Biden both seemed to recede last night?
I did. So I thought it was interesting that Bernie has, but I've been seeing that throughout this cycle, in part because, number one, I think he's been running for the last couple of years and his base seems to be built in. I don't really see a tremendous amount of growth, not in terms of his policies or in terms of his appeal to other voters and other constituencies. Biden is also interesting because if you look at his numbers over the course of the polling, he's still at about a third. He hasn't gained a whole heck of a lot. But I also think
Do you think Biden's in trouble?
I don't think he's in trouble because of the other point I was going to make, which is that these debates have not resulted in long-term bumps for any candidate.
Yeah.
Afterwards, it seems like the voters kind of settle with their preferred. No candidate has been able to convince a voter to step away from their preferred candidate.
I also want to ask you about, there's something that's come up a lot lately, which is when we look at candidates and we look at the country, we turn back to the color of their skin. I'm speaking, of course, about Donald Trump being allegedly orange. Yes. Let's take a look at the way the comedians played this.
The bulb that we're being forced to use, number one, to me, most importantly, the light's no good. I always look orange.
It's the light bulb that makes you look orange.
The light's no good. I always look orange. And so do you.
No. Wow. Whoa. No, just you.
You and other Democrats have come on this program. You've often accused the president of lying. Was he telling the truth about looking orange?
He looks orange. And you know what? It's comical. We should be laughing at that. But to be honest with you, all of what he said, at this summit or retreat, whatever it was, would be hysterical if it wasn't so tragic.
If he wasn't the president.
If he wasn't the president of the United States, it's tragic, actually. Can I make one point about color, though? Because the Democrats were at an HBCU yesterday, and I was a little disappointed that they didn't lean into issues of African Americans and higher education, particularly because HBCUs, if I remember correctly, produce the highest number of PhDs, African American PhDs in this country. Kamala Harris touched on a little bit, but there's a little situational awareness that I wish the candidates had more of being in that environment.
Very interesting. And Margaret, all our guests are equal and will be treated equally, but I give Basil extra credit for landing the orange issue and then turning us back to a serious policy point. Clearly, he's a political communications expert.
Well, Basil
your views.
missed the historic part of it, which is I've never heard Trump make a joke at his own expense. And it was a true moment amid many, many untruthful ones in Baltimore last night. He called the Green New Deal crap. There are problems with it, but not that. And, of course, he went off about the light bulbs with the orange. There's nothing that Democrats do that he approves of. And what the Democrats didn't do was talk about what he's doing. I didn't hear one of them say that just this week he's getting a final regulation that allows companies to dump chemicals into the water. So we're going to have Flint, Michigans everywhere. And this comes after rolling back the clean air so that California has an emission standard that's going to be greater than what's in the rest of the country.
Do you think, as an analyst, do you think the Democrats did do too much sparring with each other last night?
Well, I think some sparring is needed to show where you are versus the others. Not that there was a lot of clarity, because I still don't know who's for what in Medicare for All. It's such a big umbrella. Right. But At my dinner table, at any dinner table I'm at, there's more talk about Trump than there was at that debate last night.
Right. Let me bring in Matt on Joe Biden, because the other thing that happens, people say, well, what do you get out of these debates? And a good governing president does a lot of things that are not really illustrated by debates. So let's stipulate they have their limits. But it is a testing ground. And I'm hearing from a lot of folks, including folks who love Joe Biden, that they're concerned about whether this is going the right way. Take a look at the moment that many people were talking about this answer.
It's not that they don't want to help. They don't know quite what to do. Play the radio. Make sure the television, make sure you have the record player on at night, the phone. Make sure the kids hear words. A kid coming from a very poor school, or a very poor background, will hear 4 million words fewer spoken by the time they get there.
Your view of this, he is someone who charitably always had verbal gaffes, but what I'm hearing from some people now is more of a question about fitness. That's what Castro at least alluded to.
It seems like he's lost 5 miles per hour off his fastball. I think there's no question about that. He's just not as quick. I mean, 3 sentences later, he was like, I know Maduro. What does this have to do with a phonograph and the kids and the words? I mean, it didn't make sense. It was pure word salad. It's unclear in some levels whether he was talking about Afghanistan or Iraq and dividing things up. It's a problem, and one of the benefits about having a competitive Democratic primary, which is a lot different than what we had last time in 2016, you just basically had 2 candidates beating each other up, is that he's got to go through this. He's got to go through this gauntlet. He's polling well so far and managing, because I think people see him as kind of a rusty weather vane. He's not going to go full socialist. He'll just kind of blow in the direction of the wind a little bit, and they know
so
who
complimentary.
He is.
But the only question is, does he bring together those younger voters? Because right now, all of his support is trending older. There's so many young voters right now that want to get activated, that want to be energized. And that was disappointing, what I heard last night. And that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges for him, because if you remember in 2008, you had a lot of young people bringing their parents and grandparents to go vote for Barack Obama. Now his vice president is running. Are those young people going to have that same energy for him and bring their parents and grandparents to go vote for him? I don't see that that's happening right now.
And that's interesting coming from you as a top Democrat who was a supporter of the Obama-Biden administration all along the way. Basil, Matt, and Margaret, my thanks to each of you. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.